You are about to hear the story of a man who brutally murdered a 27-year-old woman in the most devastating way. And when he finally faced trial for her death, the judge presiding over the case described his actions as savage and inhuman. The way he committed the crime left both the police and prosecutors deeply shocked, questioning why a man would do such terrible things. What made his case even worse was that, after he was arrested for the murder, he bragged to his prison cellmate that he hated women and viewed them as sluts. On the 24th of June 2025, this man, by the name of Thomas Lee Gudinas, walked into the execution chamber at Florida State Prison, fully aware that he would never come out alive because of the heinous crime he committed 31 years earlier. Thomas Lee Gudinas became the 7th person executed in Florida in 2025, marking the state's highest number of executions since 2014. For 31 long years, Thomas had waited on Florida's death row for this moment. He was 51 at the time of his execution, but the story I'm about to tell you began when he was only 26. But what was it about the murder he committed that shocked both the police and the prosecutor so much that the judge who sentenced him to death called the attack savage and inhuman? Was Thomas simply a violent misogynist who hated women, or was he mentally unstable, as his lawyers wanted everyone to believe? Keep watching to find out. Before we go further, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. This channel doesn't just show how men on death row were executed, but we go further, uncovering real and hidden details about their lives long before they ever met their victims and long before the final verdict was given. You're about to hear the complete story of Thomas Lee Gudinas' crimes. Crimes that shook Florida for more than 30 years. Crimes that ended with his execution and ignited nationwide debates about justice in America. Welcome to Beyond the Final Verdict. Thomas Lee Gudinas was born on the 10th of August, 1967, in Tacoma, Washington. Thomas was raised in Massachusetts after his parents divorced when he was 6. By age 7, he began showing extreme temper tantrums that erupted without warning. He threw chairs at classmates in school, and his teachers couldn't control him. His mother, desperate and terrified, reached out to the Massachusetts Division of Youth Services to report his behavior when he was only 6 years old. But what followed after she sought help was a childhood filled with chaos. Thomas bounced through 105 different placements and facilities over the next several years. Yes, you heard that correctly. 105 placements and facilities. Let that number sink in so you can understand the seriousness of Thomas's situation. During these countless moves, officials told his mother he needed long-term residential treatment, but Thomas never received it. Instead, he was shifted from program to program, from facility to facility, and each placement failed to address the growing violence inside him. By his early teens, Thomas was using alcohol, cocaine, and LSD. These substances became part of his daily life. His first criminal record came at age 10. Think about that for a second. Imagine a child whose first crime happened at the age when most kids experience their first kiss. But for Thomas, it was his first arrest. By the early 1990s, Thomas's rap sheet was slowly growing. He was involved in car burglaries, he was involved in assault and theft. But nobody realized these small crimes were leading towards something dangerous. These early offenses should have been a warning to anyone paying attention. Little did we know that this troubled boy was growing into a man capable of committing a terrible crime in the near future. But before we get to that crime, let's continue with the details of how he got there. In 1991, Thomas turned 18, and at this age, his major crime escalation was about to begin. In Athol, Massachusetts, an 18-year-old developmentally disabled woman walked to a Christmas party at the American Legion with her young niece. Thomas grabbed her at the party and announced he would drag her into the woods and sexually assault her. After a brief struggle, she broke free from his grip, and it took several men to chase him through the streets and catch him. He was handed over to the police and was convicted of assault with intent to commit indecent assault and battery. Because of this crime, he spent 2 years in prison and briefly escaped, but the system pulled him back to complete his time. When he was released, Gudinas drifted again as expected. In 1994, he moved to North Carolina to be near his mother, but it wasn't long before he stole a car. When it was time for him to face charges for the stolen car, he ran and skipped town. By spring 1994, he arrived in Orlando, Florida, and landed a job as a busboy. The same month he was going to cross paths with the victim of this story and murder her in cold blood. Before he met the victim of this story, He lived with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment off International Drive. This was the tourist corridor where families snapped photos at theme parks. And it was only after the brutal murder happened that psychological evaluations later showed Thomas had an IQ between 85 and 92. He had untreated bipolar disorder. He was dealing with personality disorders. He also had a history of sexual disturbances diagnosed in childhood. After he committed the murder that sent him to death row, his prison cellmates later testified about his views on women. They said he hated them and saw them as sluts. His anger wasn't random, but it was targeted, deliberate, and growing more violent with every rejection he faced, every slight he felt, every insult he believed he received. By May 1994, Thomas Gudinas had become a ticking time bomb, and on the night of May 23, he would encounter Michelle McGrath, the main victim in this tragic story. When he met Michelle, his violent impulses exploded in the most horrific way. But before we get into how he met Michelle and how he eventually murdered her, let's take a moment to look at Michelle's life before she became prey to Thomas. Michelle McGrath was 27 years old in 1994. She was born and raised in Central Florida, graduated from Oak Ridge High School in 1984, where she'd been crowned homecoming queen. After high school, she built a career as a graphic designer and worked as a clerk at Martin Marietta Corporation. But statistics and job titles don't capture who Michelle was. She was the woman who handed out blankets to homeless people in downtown Orlando. She invited strangers to dinner, gave them her phone number, told them to call if they needed help. Her brother Joey later explained that, to Michelle, nobody was a stranger, everyone was a friend, and in Michelle's eyes, everyone deserved kindness. She loved making homemade guacamole, and her favorite holiday was Cinco de Mayo. She kept her nails beautifully manicured and cared about the little things. She lived fully in every moment. Just weeks before her death, she had been the maid of honor for her pregnant sister Patty. Family meant everything to Michelle. She had 1 nephew when she died, but she would eventually have had 13 nieces and nephews who never got the chance to know their aunt if she hadn't crossed paths with Thomas. On the 23rd of May 1994, Michelle went out for ladies' night at Barbarella's, a downtown Orlando nightclub known for its goth industrial vibe and pulsating energy. She went with a friend. They danced, they drank, they laughed. Around 2:45 a.m., as the club emptied, Michelle hugged her friend goodbye in the courtyard, and as her friend drove away, she walked alone to her red Geo Metro parked in a nearby lot. Michelle had no idea someone was watching. She had no idea that earlier that night, another woman had barely escaped the same predator who was locked on her. She had no idea these would be her final moments. This was a vibrant 27-year-old woman who was beloved by family and strangers alike. This was a woman who was known for her kindness. This was a former homecoming queen who never stopped caring about people. But, in minutes, all of that would be stolen from her in a darkened alley. Michelle had no idea that lurking in that parking lot was a predator who had been watching women all night. She had no idea she wasn't even the first person he attacked. But before we get into what happened after he went after her, let's rewind to when Thomas first arrived at the club and attacked his first victim before crossing paths with Michelle. Thomas arrived at Barbarella's nightclub between 8:30 and 9 p.m. on the 23rd of May, 1994. He came with 3 roommates. They'd been drinking beer and smoking marijuana at their apartment before leaving. Even in the car, they kept smoking. By the time they arrived at the club, Thomas was already buzzed. His judgment was impaired, and his impulses were slipping. Inside Barbarella's nightclub, people danced and moved around the dance floor as usual. Meanwhile, Thomas kept drinking, nursing rum and cokes throughout the night. He also went back to the car periodically to smoke more marijuana. According to court testimony, his roommate Todd Gates last saw him around 1 a.m. That's when Thomas seemed to disappear. When the nightclub closed at 3 a.m., his roommates couldn't find him, so they left without him. But Thomas hadn't left. He was still active. Around 2 a.m., a woman named Rochelle Smith left the club ahead of her fiancé. She walked toward the parking lot she thought was correct, but realized she was wrong. As she changed direction, she noticed a man crouched behind a car, watching her. She quickly made her way to the correct lot, got in her car, and locked the doors. Rochelle later testified that even after locking the doors, the man followed her to the car. He tried the passenger door, found it locked, then moved to the driver's side. Covering his hand with his shirt, he attempted to smash the window while shouting profanities, seemingly threatening sexual assault. In panic, Rochelle slammed the car horn loudly. The man fled from the scene knowing the sound of the car horn had drew attention. That man was Thomas Gudinas, and Michelle McGrath's car was also parked in the same lot. The first attempt with Rochelle had failed, so now Michelle was in the same parking lot, walking toward her car. What happened next would be reconstructed through witness testimony, forensic evidence, and the brutal condition of Michelle's body discovered hours later. Prosecutors presented the sequence of events that happened during the court trial, and the court documents detailed every horrific moment. Michelle was last seen leaving Barbarella's nightclub around 2:45 a.m. She walked to her red Geo Metro vehicle in the dark parking lot. Thomas was hiding behind a dumpster, watching her approach. As she rounded the corner, her keys jingling, he attacked. Court testimony revealed that Thomas grabbed Michelle from behind, covering her mouth to stop her screams. He dragged her about 20 feet into an alley next to Pace School for Girls, off Washington Street. Michelle fought back, trying to scream, and her purse spilled on the gravel. Lipstick, wallet, and pager scattered everywhere. Prosecutors told the jury that Thomas pinned Michelle against the fence and sexually assaulted her. She begged him to stop, but he did not. Court records showed defensive wounds on her hands, proving she fought for her life. After the assault, Thomas stayed and continued to hurt Michelle with his fists. Medical examiners later testified that her death was caused by a brain hemorrhage from blunt force trauma to the head, likely from repeated stomping-type blows. The attack lasted between 10 and 15 minutes. Court testimony revealed that 2 broken sticks were inserted into Michelle's body post-mortem. Her blood alcohol content was 0.17%. Prosecutors noted this may have prolonged her suffering but wasn't a factor in the fatal injury. The medical examiner described the scene as displaying savage and inhuman violence. Michelle McGrath died sometime between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. on the 24th of May 1994. Her body was left in the alley, completely naked except for her bra, which was pushed above her breasts. What Thomas did that night went beyond murder. It was pure desecration. But Thomas made mistakes. Right after the attack, around 3:05 a.m., he stripped Michelle almost completely, took her car keys, purse, and clothes, and drove off in her red Geo Metro vehicle. Between 4 and 5 a.m., a passerby named Colbert Presley walked through the parking lot and found Michelle's keys and a bundle of her clothes on the ground near her car. Not knowing what had happened, Presley picked up the keys. Moments later, he saw Thomas walking south through the lot and handed the keys to him, thinking he might be the owner. Thomas casually said thanks and kept walking. Around the same time, Orlando Bicycle Patrol Officer Cesari rode through the area and noticed Thomas getting into a red Geo Metro and driving away. Something seemed off, so Cesari wrote down the license plate. At 7:30 a.m., a school employee, Jane Brand, arrived to open the gate at Pace School and discovered Michelle's body. She screamed. Officer Cesari, nearby on patrol, responded to the scene, which was unlike anything Orlando investigators had seen before. Later, Cesari checked the license plate he had written down and discovered it was registered to Michelle McGrath, the murder victim. Police recovered Michelle's car at 7 p.m. that evening at Holiday Club Apartments. Thomas's palm print was found on the alley gate. His fingerprints were on a bank payment book inside McGrath's car. DNA testing matched semen found on McGrath's body to Thomas. The evidence was clear. Days after the murder, police arrested Thomas Gudinas at his apartment. He didn't resist. A composite sketch from witnesses led investigators directly to him. Rochelle Smith, the woman who'd escaped Thomas hours before Michelle's murder, identified him in a lineup. Thomas's roommates confirmed that he was at Barbarella's nightclub that night. Forensic evidence sealed his fate. DNA matched semen found on Michelle's body. His palm print was on the alley gate, and his fingerprints were inside her car. In jail, Thomas admitted to cellmates that he killed Michelle, then had sex with her body. He told his cellmates that he hated women, adding that he considered them sluts and enjoyed their fear. The court trial had to be moved to Naples, which is 200 miles south, due to extensive Orlando media coverage on the case. In May 1995, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence including DNA, fingerprints, eyewitness testimony, and Thomas's prior conviction for assault with intent to sexually assault in Massachusetts. Defense attorneys argued for mitigation, Defense claimed he passed through 105 youth facility placements, childhood abuse, and untreated mental illness. They added that he had an IQ of 85 to 92. Regardless of all these claims, the jury convicted him in less than 2 hours. They recommended death by a vote of 10 to 2. The judge presiding over the case sentenced Thomas to death on the 16th of June 1995, calling the attack savage and inhuman. The judge also noted that Michelle did not meet a swift, merciful, and painless death. Thomas spent 31 years on Florida State Prison's death row. His appeals were denied repeatedly. His main arguments were centered on mental illness, ineffective counsel, and intellectual disability claims. But while on death row, his untreated bipolar disorder manifested in erratic behavior. He attempted self-harm in 2012 when he swallowed a razor through his mouth. He also converted from Catholic to Odinist and kept rambling manifestos claiming a secret system ran the government. In February 2025, he wrote a letter to President Trump. On the 23rd of May 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant. His final appeals argued that executing the severely mentally ill violated the Eighth Amendment, but courts rejected every claim. On June 24, the US Supreme Court denied his stay application hours before execution. On the 24th of June 2025, Thomas Gudinas woke at 4:45 a.m. at Florida State Prison. His final meal was pepperoni pizza, French fries, and soda. His mother visited. At 6 p.m., he was strapped to a gurney, IV in his left arm. 19 witnesses watched through bullet-resistant glass. When asked for final words, Thomas spoke, but his words were inaudible to witnesses. A spokesman for Governor DeSantis said that Thomas Gudinas repented and made a reference to Jesus. The three-drug protocol began. At 6:13 p.m., Thomas Gudinas was pronounced dead. He became the 7th person executed in Florida in 2025, the 23rd in the United States. After 31 years, Michelle McGrath's family could finally stop waiting, but questions remain. Was Thomas a monster shaped by neglect and untreated mental illness, failed by a system that bounced him through 105 facilities without real help? Or was he simply a violent predator who made calculated choices and deserved exactly what he got? The execution chamber has closed. The legal arguments have ended, but the debate over justice, mental illness, and the death penalty continues. Michelle McGrath was 27 years old when she died in that alley. She would be 58 now. Justice, after 3 decades, finally arrived. Whether it brought closure is a question only the Michelle McGrath family can answer.